That's it. I've had enough. Do you know this frustration? It feels like you spend more time drawing lines that aren't going to make it to the end of the drawing than you do drawing lines that do. And I'm not talking here about a way of drawing where you create a pencil under drawing which you use as a guideline for drawing ink lines over the top and where you erase all of the pencil lines at the end. But I'm talking about a habit of drawing where our intention is either to create a drawing entirely in pencil or where we're creating more of a draft in pencil which we then will ink over the top. But because we don't trust our ability to draw the lines in ink as accurately as we would like, we want a very precise pencil underdrawing. But this habit can be really destructive to our overall skill development in drawing, let alone to our enjoyment of the process of drawing. Let me explain why, for some people at least, using an eraser may be the very worst thing they can do to help them improve their drawing. And then I'll suggest a drawing strategy to help get out of an over-reliance on the eraser. And then at the end, I'll do a quick ink drawing. This constant process of erasing lines that aren't right overlaps with another thing I've talked about in other videos, an unhelpful focus on having a perfect artwork at the end. It's such an unrealistic goal for most of us all the time, let alone when we're at the start of our drawing journey. It puts this focus in a place that won't actually help me develop or improve my drawing or my understanding of drawing. If I have a drawing mantra, it's we get better at what we practice. Really, what this means is we get better at whatever we do over and over and over. And if I'm drawing lines and judging them as not good enough and erasing them constantly, then that's what I'm going to get better at. And if this is you, I guarantee that as time goes on, you'll find more and more lines not good enough and that you'll erase more and more as the need for perfectionism increases as you give into it. Because that's the way perfectionism works. It seems to always demand more and more and more of us, and we feel that our work is less and less and less good enough. And that'll keep us reaching for the eraser constantly. The final unhelpful focus that this over-reliance on erasers can give us is that it puts our concentration on every line, line by line, instead of seeing a drawing as a whole lot of things that come together to create a certain visual effect. We're continually over-judging every line, every component of our artwork individually, just in case we need to erase it. In the end, this creation of a lot of separate parts, rather than as a unified whole, can leave our drawing looking very wooden and lifeless, even mechanical, compared to a drawing where the focus was always on how the lines I've drawn will look in conjunction with the lines I'm yet to draw, and building layers of line work that together will create the visual impact I'm wanting, rather than a focus on every line and a fear that it's not quite right. What I'm wanting to produce in my drawings are lines that still retain some of the vitality with which I drew them. And it's hard to draw lines with that sort of liveliness if I'm driven by a fear that it won't be quite right, with my pencil in one hand and an eraser in the other. So what is the more productive and, might I say, enjoyable focus we should be having when we're drawing, that being hyper-vigilant with an eraser in one hand, looking for mistakes all the time, holds us back from achieving? But the bigger problem is that constantly looking out for imperfections that we can erase actually stops us from developing the understanding of drawing and the development of skills that we in fact need to learn in order to draw the way we want to draw. And part of that is learning to deal with mistakes, learning to deal with lines that aren't as ideally drawn as we would have liked, whether we're drawing with pen or with pencil. And it's a very important understanding to have and skill to develop, because we will draw so many imperfect lines that aren't quite what we would have hoped for before we'd put pen or pencil to paper. And we have to learn to deal with mistakes in two ways. Firstly, in our head, and secondly, on the paper. In my head, because I have to learn not to be scared of either making mistakes or mistakes that I have made. And I have a few videos on dealing with mistakes and ways of, well, possibly covering up some mistakes at least that you might find helpful if this is an area of concern for you. And especially if I know I deal with perfectionism, with a need for everything to be right, or else somehow I can't cope, I can't go on. Especially if I know that I have something of that in my thought processes. It's important for me to learn by experience that mistakes are not a disaster. I have learned from repeatedly making mistakes that they never look as bad or have as much impact as when I've just made them. And that's often because I tend to make more mistakes early in the drawing when I have less lines on my paper to use to judge the best place to put a line. And because there are less lines on the page, there's less, if you like, distraction away from the mistake. But beyond just learning to cope with the stress of seeing a mistake, with the feeling of, oh no, I've ruined my drawing, which almost certainly isn't true, there's also the importance of developing the skills that we need to learn, firstly, so that we don't make as many mistakes in the first place, but then also to learn the skills and the techniques we can use to cover up lines that aren't in an ideal position. I would guess that at least a third of my perspective angle lines are not quite right, are not in a place that I'm happy with when I first draw them. But I have developed a technique of drawing of often using several lines over the top of each other, and I make sure that at least one of them is in the right place. And after I've drawn one or two lines not quite right, it becomes easier to see where I need to position the next line exactly so that it will be in the right place. And that's a great thought process to have. Every line that's not quite right is helping me line up the perfect line on my next go. Because having this focus on a perfect artwork at the end, made up of lines that were put exactly in the right spot, one after the other, really does distract me from the fact that drawing is a process to be learned of skills that can be learned. And a perfectionism that rushes to erase every line that it fears may not be quite good enough hijacks our drawing experience away from learning a healthy drawing process and away from learning to develop the skills that will help us cope with any errors that we will certainly make. Not to mention the other skills we could be concentrating on developing, which would actually help us to make less mistakes in the first place. And we do need to learn to judge which errors are serious enough that the best course of action is to say, I think I need to start this again, and use this as a, if you like, first draft, a way of helping me to focus to understand where the particularly tricky parts of drawing this building, this scene are, which have helped make me ready to do a more accurate version the second time round. And that's happened to me several times when I've been drawing for YouTube videos. And I've always taken the opportunity to use that situation at the end to show my, if you like, false start and to explain what made me decide at that point that I was better off starting the drawing again than pushing through the mistakes that I've made. Because again, learning to make that decision well is part of the process of learning to draw. None of us have to pretend that we get it right every time. The last thing I would want any of you to think about me and my drawing is that it's perfect all the time and it just flies out as easily as a highly edited, often vastly sped up video of that process would seem to indicate. Here are some strategies for overcoming fear of mistakes. One idea is to draw directly in pen. Ink can't be erased. So we burn our boats right at the start. We don't even start to play the game of how much erasing is too much erasing. We accept that some lines aren't going to be perfect, but we'll embrace that as part of the overall process of drawing. And we'll decide that if a line is wrong, we'll correct it over the top till it's correct. And that we'll focus on the overall drawing, not on any one error. I will make myself work at the drawing till it's done. Despite any errors, I will continue to work on this drawing as if it was perfect up to that point, in order that I might learn how much I can mitigate errors by either additional line work or just the overall effect and visual impact of the drawing at the very end. It can be helpful to set a short time limit for each drawing, to force myself to draw quickly and to experience the feeling and the result of a brisk, lively line. Having a very short time limit, in a sense, gives me an excuse to have some lines in the wrong place. It gives me permission to fail, because lines that are fairly loose in their placement is going to be part of the speed with which I'll have to work. It can also be helpful to draw the same reference twice in a row. That way, any imperfections in my first drawing can give me a focus in my second version of the same reference. It lets me use my mistakes to benefit my drawing, which is again a great experience to have. And it's certainly helpful to choose simple subjects at first, so that I don't create too many difficult and stressful factors to have to juggle and think about and get right all at the same time. Experiencing the success of drawings that look good is part of a healthy drawing process. And I've got more chance of experiencing that if what I attempt at the start is appropriate for the level of skill and confidence that I have. I can introduce more difficult subjects or elements bit by bit with subsequent drawings. Setting certain constraints such as these on our drawing reminds me that drawing is a process. It's a process, and it's a set of skills that can be learned. And that takes the focus away from having a perfect gallery standard artwork at the end. It reminds me that being able to draw well is not some magical, mystical talent that I'm either born with or I'm not, but it is something where I can make choices and do things in a certain way to benefit my drawing development. I become free to learn, to experiment, to take risks. So, what do you think? Is it time to throw away your eraser? At least for a while? Maybe it's worth a go. I can certainly recommend drawing in ink, directly in ink, which I began to do in preparation for street sketching for an overseas trip that finished up being cancelled because of COVID. But I'm really glad that I began to learn to draw directly in ink. It's a really exhilarating way to learn to draw. And of course, it's not the only way to draw, but it's great to have a range of drawing approaches that we can adopt as the situation or the desire takes us. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting at least. Even more so, I hope some of you found it helpful. The important thing is, whatever you're drawing, however you're drawing it, in whatever time you're drawing it, have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.